Hey, what's going on guys? Tanmay here for Simple Snippets and welcome back to another video tutorial on pattern printing programs, and let's continue with two more triangle patterns. So as you can see, these are again incremental numbers and they come with simple triangle, which is also known as half pyramid pattern style. And if you've watched this entire pattern printing program, this is what we've been doing so far. So in the previous tutorial also we saw 4 different triangle patterns and all of them were incremental numbers only. The only difference is that in this pattern, the numbers are incrementing in one particular row as well, right? So if you watch the previous video, the pattern was something like this. On the first row we had only 1, then on the second row we had 2 2s, on the third row we had 3 3s, then 4 4s and 5 5s, right? So this is what we did in the previous tutorial, but if you observe this pattern 1, over here we are getting a number and we are getting the entire series depending upon the row number, right? So on the first row we are printing one element, one number, so that's why it is 1. On the second row we are printing 2 elements, but it is not the same number but the sequence. So 1 and then incrementing 1 by 1 you get 2, so that is what is printed. So for the third row we have 3 elements in sequence 1, 2 and 3. For the fourth row we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and for the fifth row we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So this is pattern 1. And for triangle pattern 2, this is also incremental numbers only. So these all types of patterns fall into the category of incremental numbers because the numbers are incremented, pretty basic. So for pattern 2 we have number 1 being printed, only one element on the first row. On the second row we have 2 elements, but that number that was printed before it got incremented and that is what is started printing from the second row. So 1 was already printed, hence we did not print 1 again. We printed 2, which is 1 more than the previous number, and then we printed 3. So on the third row we want 3 elements, but we cannot print 1, 2, 3 because they are already printed. Then we are starting from 4, 5, 6. Correct? For the fourth row we have 7, 8, 9, 10. And for the fifth row, the reason why this is looking like a longer row is because we have a 2-digit numbers. So we have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. These are 5 numbers only, but they're still looking longer because, as I mentioned, 2-digit numbers. So these are the 2 patterns that we are going to study in this tutorial, and when I say study, we are going to dry run the entire for loops for both of these patterns. The for loops are shown below each pattern, and not just dry run and step by step understand it, but also see a program by the end of this video tutorial. So make sure you watch this video till the end. Trust me, after watching this tutorial, this pattern printing programs will be very thorough, and this is the best way to learn pattern printing programs is by dry running the code step by step. So take a pencil and paper and let's get on with it. Okay, so let's start off with triangle pattern 1. On the left hand side on the top we have the pattern. Below we have the 2 for loops which will generate this pattern. We'll talk about it. On the right hand side we have the different variable values which we are going to track. So there are multiple variables involved in this code. So we will dry run it, and when I say dry run it, we will go step by step. So we have to track what are the values. And on the bottom right we have output. I have drawn a basic command prompt where we will draw the output as well. You can do this on a pencil and paper also. I highly recommend that. And now let's talk about the pattern again. As I said, we have 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this can change depending upon what the user wants, what you want to print. And this is basically usually the number of rows which is determined by the variable n. So let's write 5, correct? So this is something that we are assuming in this example, but this can change. Okay. The next thing that you observe is the numbers are incremental, which means that for the first row we want 1 number, for the second row we want 2 numbers, but the 2 numbers will start from 1 and 2, which will be in a sequence. For the third row we have 1, 2, 3. For the fourth row we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and the pattern follows, right? So if we had a 6th row, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, right? Pretty understandable. Alright. So let's see how to go about printing this. Now if you've seen any of the previous tutorials, the for loop structures are pretty much similar, but for those who haven't, don't worry, we're gonna dry run this entire thing again. So we are using C++ programming to implement these patterns, but if you're using any other general purpose programming language like Java, JavaScript, Python, the logic is pretty much going to be the same. The for loop conditions are also going to be the same because I'm pretty sure most general purpose programming language have different type of looping structures. So we are going with C++, but you can choose any other general purpose programming language. Alright, so let's start off with the for loop, and we have two for loops over here. You can see this is the outer for loop and this is the inner for loop. So typically with the half pyramid triangle patterns, the outer for loop deals with the number of rows. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So since n is 5, that is we want 5 rows, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. The outer for loop is going to run for 5 times, and this is what is exactly happening. Over here we are initializing int I equals to 1. So let's track that. So we are tracking variable values. This is a variable which is going to be an iterating variable in the for loop. So we need to keep a track of that. That is what is dry running. Then we have the condition I has to be less than or equal to n. So 1, which is the value of I at the initialization time, has to be less than or equal to, what is n? N we just said is 5, we want 5 rows. So it has to be less than or equal to 5. And we are saying I++. This means that in this for loop, the I value will go from 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Correct? Because I has to be less than or equal to n, which means I has to be less than or equal to 5. So it can take values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 because 5 is equal to 5. And if you see the number of iterations, you can see it is going to run for 5 times. So this is basic. This is the only purpose of the outer for loop, which is to generate these rows. However, the printing actually happens in the inner for loop. Alright, so now let's move inside. We've just said I equals to 1. Initialization happens only once in for loop. I hope you know the working of a for loop. That is absolutely important. If not, I have a tutorial on for loop in C++ on this channel in the C++ course. You can check that out. But moving on, in the next for loop, we are creating one more iterator j. We are saying j equals to 1. Correct? That is what is initialized over here. And the condition here is we are saying j has to be less than or equal to I. So j we just said is 1. 1 has to be less than or equal to I. What is the value of I right now? For the first iteration, i's value is going to be 1. And we are in the first iteration. So 1 has to be less than or equal to 1. Is it true? Yes. Because 1 is not less than 1, but it is equal to 1. Which means that this condition is true. And remember, in a for loop, the condition is checked first because for loop is an entry control loop. I hope you know what is an entry control loop. Basically, the condition is checked first, and if it is true, only then you go inside the loop. And so over here, since it is true, you go inside the loop, and what you're printing is you're printing the value j. So as I mentioned, this is where the printing is happening, and what is the value of j currently? It is 1. So 1 is going to be printed. Right? So let's print out 1 onto the command prompt. And this is the only instruction in this for loop. So again, you'll come at the start of the for loop, and now the increment will happen. You're saying j++. So j will now become 2. Okay. So once j becomes 2, again this condition is going to be checked because initialization only happens once. So now directly the condition will be checked. Is j less than equal to I again? This time it is not because j has become 2 and 2 is not less than or equal to 1. 2 is greater than 1. Correct? Because I has still been 1 only because we are in the first iteration only of the outer for loop. So now the condition becomes false. So you will not go inside the for loop, you will come outside the inner for loop. And the last statement is cout endl, which is nothing but an instruction to take the cursor onto the next line. So in C++, endl means end line and it takes you to the next line onto the command prompt. Pretty basic. Okay. After this, you'll again go to the start of the outer for loop. And now I will become plus plus. So I will take a new value and that value is going to be 2 because we are saying I plus plus, I was 1. When you say plus plus, I will become 2. Correct? So let's make it 2. Now when I becomes 2, the condition again is checked. Is I less than equal to n? So is 2 less than equal to 5? Yes, n is 5, right? So I can take values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are valid values. So we don't even have to check. I'm just saying that this condition is checked again. And again you'll go inside. And now the second for loop will again start running. So again in j equals to 1 will be created. So j will reinitialize with the value 1. And now the condition again will be checked. Is j less than I? J has become 1. Is 1 less than equal to I? I this time is 2. And we are saying j++. So which means j can take values 1 and 2. Correct? So this time the inner for loop will run 2 times. In the first iteration of the outer for loop, the inner for loop ran only 1 time. That is because we only wanted one value to be printed onto the first row. But now if you observe, when I has become 2, the inner for loop is also running 2 times because of this condition. And what we are printing the j value only. As I said, j is gonna get the values 1. So first 1 will be printed. Then you'll again go at the start of the for loop. You'll say j plus plus. J will take value 2. Is 2 less than or equal to 2? Yes, 2 is equal to 2. So you'll go again inside and you're saying cout j. J's value we just said is 2. Let's make that change over here also. And now 2 will be printed. Right? So again you'll go at the start of the for loop. We'll say j plus plus. J will become 3. And now the condition will become false. Because the condition is j has to be less than or equal to I. Is 3 less than or equal to 2? No. 3 is greater than 2. So this means that now the condition will become false. You will come outside the for loop. You will say cout endl, which will take you to the new line. Then you will come at the start of the for loop. You will say I plus plus. I will now take the value of 3. So I will now become 3. Correct? 3 is still valid because 3 is less than n. That is 3 is less than 5. So you will go inside the for loop. Again you will say j equals to 1. And j has to be less than or equal to 3 now. We just said j is 1 and we are saying j plus plus. So j will take the values 1, 2 and 3. Because when j becomes 3, 3 is still going to be less than or equal to 3. Right? So inner for loop will now run 3 times taking the values 1, 2 and 3. And when you go inside the inner for loop, the only thing that you are doing is printing the j values. So 1, 2 and 3 will be printed. I hope I am not going very fast and now you've got a hang of it. If you feel I'm going fast, just take a pencil and paper, pause this video and dry run this code yourself. You'll get the hang of it and you'll understand why this condition is more important and it is playing a huge role in printing out this pattern. Now after running the inner for loop 3 times, j will become 4 and the condition will become false. So you'll come outside the for loop. You'll say cout endl, come to the new line. After this statement, you'll go to the start of the for loop. I will become 4 because I will become plus plus. So when I becomes 4, 4 is still less than 5. We have to be less than or equal to 5, correct? You'll go inside. Again j will become 1. 1 has to be less than equal to 4 and we are saying j plus plus. So now the inner for loop will take 1, 2, 3 and 4. These values, which means that the inner for loop will run 4 times and it will print these j values side by side. So 1, 2, 3 and 4 will be printed. After j becomes 5, this loop will stop working because 5 is not less than or equal to 4. So you'll come outside, you'll say cout endl, come to the new line. Again go at the start of the for loop and I will now become 5. So when I will become 5, 5 is still less than or equal to n because n is 5. So 5 is equal to 5, right? So the condition is true. You'll go inside. Again you'll say j equals to 1. 1 has to be less than equal to 5 because I has become 5 and you're saying j plus plus. So now this for loop will run for 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 times because these are the values that the j will take incrementally. And simply you're printing these values. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 will be printed. After which j will become 6 and the condition will become false. You'll come outside, come onto the new line, go to the start of the for loop and now I will become 6. Now when I become 6, you'll again check, is 6 less than equal to n? What is the value of n? N is constant, which is 5. Is 6 less than or equal to 5? No, 6 is greater than 5. So now the condition becomes false and this entire for loop will stop working. You'll come outside the for loop and if you observe the command prompt output, we have basically got our triangle printed successfully. And this is the pattern that we wanted, right? If you see the triangle pattern 1, this is exactly what we want. Okay, so this was simple triangle half pyramid with a variation of incremental numbers. I hope you've got the understanding of it and how the inner for loop worked and how you printed cout j. Now if you've seen previous tutorials, over here we were printing I and that was giving us the other type which you can see on the screen. But when you print j, which is the inner iterator value, you're getting this pattern. So just by changing one element and keeping everything else same, you can see the output has changed in terms of what is printed. The pattern is still half pyramid triangle, but what is printed inside has changed, right? Okay, so now let's see pattern number 2. So if you've understood pattern 1, pattern 2 is pretty much exactly the same with this extra variable, and that is because in pattern 2 what we want to print is numbers being incremented and you cannot repeat them. So on row 1 we want only one element or one number, which is 1, but for row 2 we want two numbers but not one, because one is already printed, so you want to print the next numbers. So there is a sequence, but the printing is happening only once. That is, one number is printed only once, and then you can see the two elements are 2 and 3. For third row we want three elements, but 1, 2 and 3 are already printed, so we want 4, 5, 6. That is the next numbers. Okay, so you cannot repeat the numbers. In pattern 1 the numbers were repeating. So this is the output that we want, and to keep a track of that we have created one more variable, int x, and we are declaring and storing 1 in it. So let's write x over here, x equals to 1. Now when it comes to the looping structure, the looping structure is exactly the same that we saw in pattern 1. So let's quickly go through it. Just the printing has changed and we are printing this x that we are creating over here, and we simply have to increment it. Okay, alright. So you are printing x and then you are saying plus plus. This is a post increment operator. I'll tell you what it is and how it works when we dry run it. But moving on in the for loop, again you are saying int I equals to 1, I has to be less than n is equal to 5, which is going to be constant because we want again 5 rows. So we are still wanting 5 rows. Depending upon how many number of rows we want, this will change. And again the outer for loop is concerned with the number of rows. Okay, and we are saying I plus plus. So I will take value 1 because we are starting with 1, and it has to be less than or equal to n, which is less than or equal to 5, and you are saying I plus plus. So I will take values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, which means that the outer for loop will run 5 times. Pretty basic. Moving inside, again you are saying int j equals to 1. So j equals to 1 and j has to be less than equal to I, and you are saying j plus plus. So right now j is 1. It has to be less than equal to I is also 1 right now, right? So let's create I also over here. I equals to 1, j equals to 1, correct? So 1 has to be less than equal to 1. Is it true? Yes. 1 is equal to 1 right now. So you go inside and you're printing cout x plus plus. So what this instruction does is it prints the value of x currently, which is 1. So 1 is going to be printed and then it increments it. That is what post increment does. So this command basically prints the value of x and then increments it. So now the x value is going to be incremented and x is going to have 2. Now you can also do this in 2 steps. You can say cout x and on the next line you can say x plus plus. That is going to have the same effect. Or you can say cout x and on the next line you can say plus plus x, which is pre-increment. But this does the same trick in one line. Okay, so that's why I used only one line. Now after this, again you'll come at the start of the for loop, you'll say j plus plus. So j will become 2. So again you'll check the condition. Is 2 less than equal to 1? 2 is not less than 1 because I is still 1, right? So this condition will become false. You'll come outside the for loop. That is outside the inner for loop. You'll say cout endl and come on the new line. Again you'll go at the start of the for loop. I value will now become 2. So let's make that change. 2 is a valid I value because it is still less than n, which is 5, correct? So you'll go inside for, you'll say j equals to 1. So the inner for loop will now start working. When j is equal to 1, j has to be less than I is 2 and j is 1. So this is true. So j can take values 1 and 2 now because we are saying j plus plus. And the inner for loop will run 2 times and both times we are saying cout x plus plus. We are not doing j over here. That is because we want this incremental pattern where the number should not repeat. So first time we are saying cout x plus plus. What is the value of x? X is 2. Then it is incremented to 3. So after this you'll go at the start of the for loop and j will now become 2. Again you'll say cout x plus plus. X is 3. 3 is printed and now x will be incremented to 4. Okay. So printing and incrementation is happening on the same line. If you are again confused, just say cout x, that is print the value of x on one line, and on the next line you can increment it by 1 and that will have the same effect. So after running the inner for loop 2 times, j will become 3. When j becomes 3, this condition will become false because 3 is not less than equal to 2. So you will come outside the for loop, you will say cout endl onto the new line. go at the start of the for loop, and I value will now become 3. So I'm guessing you guys have got the pattern, understood the pattern. So let's go a little faster. When I is 3, the inner for loop will run 3 times, starting from j equals to 1 to 3, correct? So 1, 2 and 3 are the values that the j will take. And then you're simply gonna print cout x plus plus, x is 4, print 4, 4 gets incremented to 5, then 5 is printed, 5 gets incremented to 6, then 6 is printed for the third time because the inner for loop is running 3 times, and then 6 is incremented to 7. Alright, so after running 3 times the inner for loop will stop working. You'll come outside, you'll go to the new line, you'll come at the start of the for loop, and I will now become 4. So when I becomes 4, you'll go inside the inner for loop. Inner for loop will run 4 times, starting from j1 to j4, correct? 1, 2, 3 and 4. These are the values that j will now take because j has to be less than I or less than equal to I basically. And inside you'll simply print 7, 8, 9 and 10. And x value will become 11. I'm going a little fast, but you can just simply slow it down by dry running it yourself. Alright, so after running 4 times, you'll come outside, you'll go to the start, I will become 5. You'll come inside, this for loop will now run 5 times from 1 to 5. You'll print 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. Then you'll come outside, you'll go to the new line. You'll come at the start of the for loop and I will now become 6. So when I become 6, the condition will become false. So 6 is not less than equal to n, which is 5. 6 is greater than 5. So this outer for loop will stop working. You'll come outside the for loop, and if you observe the output, we have basically got what we want, the incremental triangle. Okay. And this looks like pattern 2. Okay, so this was the second variant of incremental numbers with the half pyramid pattern. I hope you've understood. I know I went a little fast. You can dry run this code. You'll easily understand it with the pencil and paper technique by tracking the different variable values. So this was the entire working with the diagram, with the dry running and the code. But now let's quickly jump to the C++ IDE and see the program in action and cover the practical side as well. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, I've already typed the code. This is for pattern 1 and this is for pattern 2. I'm not gonna type it again and again because it will simply be waste of time. Don't worry, I'm gonna be sharing this entire code with you guys. So if you see in the video description, there will be a link to our official website where you can download this code, copy this code, try it out yourself. I highly recommend that you type it once with your own hands for the best practice. So these are two different functions inside which we have that same for loop, and I've simply said pattern 1 and pattern 2. Okay. Now in the main function, we are declaring this num. This num corresponds to n, which is the number of rows. And then we are saying cout enter the number of levels, that is number of rows basically. We're taking that number from the user and then we are calling the two different functions. Pretty basic. Let's save this. Let's go to execute, compile and run. Now before we add the values, one thing that I do want to tell you is in the pattern 2, I am saying cout x plus plus, and along with that I'm adding a little bit of space because only then you'll be able to distinguish between 2-digit numbers. Otherwise it would go in a mixed way. Otherwise all the numbers will be very close to each other and you'll not be able to understand which number is which. You'll see that when we see the output. Over here you can see it is asking the number of levels. Let's enter 5. When you hit enter, you can see pattern 1, which is without spaces. We have 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And pattern 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And this is the reason why I have added spaces, because if there were no spaces, 11 and 12 will be stuck to each other and you'll not understand what is what number. So that's why I've added extra spaces. Okay. Now if you were to execute, compile and run and maybe add more number of levels, let's see how that goes. I'll add 8, hit enter, and there you go. You can see 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 till 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And for pattern 2, we have the incremental way where the numbers are not repeated. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, so on and so forth till 36. Okay, so this means our code is working perfectly fine. We've done with the implementation. I know I did not type it from scratch, but this was the exact code that we just dry run, so didn't want to waste your time. As I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing this code. You can check the link in the video description for this code. And I'm going to wrap this video over here. We completely saw the working, we dry run the code, we saw the diagram, we tracked all the variable values step by step, and we also covered the practical side by seeing the working code. So I hope you understood this entire video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments how this video was. Do share it with your friends. If you have any suggestions and if you know any other patterns which you want me to cover, definitely let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Peace.